$1,000 was...
Whispers from a Coffin. A story by Leonardo Chirinos. While all residents were asleep and a new day rose from the darkness, Bastián was crawling on a strange floor looking for his glasses. His myopia didn't allow him to see clearly. What a nightmare, he mused, thinking about the terrible migraine he always suffered after a few minutes without his glasses. He stood up and tried to look around. He saw the room through the veil of his poor vision. The walls and floor formed aberrant edges. Every corner was bathed in the light of a dying yellow bulb flickering on the ceiling. Holding his arms in front of him for protection and placing a foot in front of the other very carefully. Then he heard voices and got startled to the point that he lost his footing. "This is a terrible idea," a woman said after opening the door to the room. A relatively young couple came into and the light went off. "It will be fun," a man replied, delighted. "And don't you want something new?" Bastián hid under a pile of chairs in a corner. He was seized with terror and curled up like a turtle in its shell. "Yes, but it's your uncle," the woman insisted. "Stop it, you are out of your mind." "That was you like about me, isn't it?" The man replied, gasping. "Shut up and come here." Bastián heard soft and wet sounds, and then the chairs scraping against the floor. The boy craned his neck to try to see. The man's back was turned to Bastián and his body was blocking the woman. He threw her up against the wall, fighting back gently. She moaned. Then, when he picked her up to one of the chairs in an aggressive move, the sound of breaking glass filled the room. "What's this?" the man asked, leaving the woman and bending over to pick up whatever his boat has crushed. "What?" the young woman replied in an agitated voice. The man stood up, holding the broken object with his fingertips that from the height dropped small pieces of glass to the floor. He identified it by touch soon. "They are glasses." Bastián panicked. He pictured the man scouring the room out in the darkness. "Surely somebody left them this afternoon," the woman said. The man gave no sign to have listened to her. "It couldn't be the first time someone loses a thing here." For a moment the teenager had a feeling of being watched and closed his eyes, as if this way he could become invisible. He heard footsteps approaching, cracking because of the fragments of broken glass in the sole. Suddenly, the woman called out her partner's name. "Do you hear that?" She continued. Bastián covered his mouth with his hand. He realized that he was breathing hard. Soon he noted what she had heard. The turmoil of a group of people that extended along the streets like the crackling of the wood after being touched by fire. The young man arranged her dress and walked in a hurry to the door, turned on the light of the room, and the man followed her. "Mrs., I finally found you!" A man cried out in alarm from the corridor. "Your dad's van is on fire!" "What did you say?" the other man said, a bit confused, and all of them ran out into the street. Bastián rushed up, and as he could, he found his way to climb out the window. When he started climbing, he could clearly listen to the people shouting out while trying to extinguish the flames. "Bring more water!" When he reached out of the window, the voices in his head echoed with the idea. What if Tony set the fire to the van to buy you time? He remembered the unfortunate accident when Tony, without intent, cracked the pharmacist's daughter over the head with a rock. And how, after they told his grandma about the incident, he disappeared for a week. Cesar, one of the twins, who he could consider the closest thing to a friend, told him that the old lady had kept Tony close in a wardrobe all that time. "She's a witch," Caesar said to him on that occasion. People say that she forced him to steal bones from the cemetery. Bones? Bastián asked, surprised. Why would she want that? I don't know, but it's awful, Caesar replied. Death can only attract death, my friend. Whoever is capable of doing that must despise life. After that conversation, Bastián could not help but feel chills run through his spine every time he saw her. He even came to feel sorry for Tony, or at least until he ran his mouth off and he showed how much a jerk he could be. But despite all those things, would he dare to set fire to the van? He knew the answer. Tony would do that and more as long as he could save himself from another trouble with his grandma. So he stopped and turned again to the blurred figure of the coffin. The way he felt drawn to it was unbearable. Every time he tried to escape, the reason that pushed him to that damn box came up to his mind. He was doomed to take that picture. He crossed the quiet room carefully, stumbling around with the visions of his own short-sightedness. After feeling the cold wood with his fingertips, he raised his head. He looked more closely to offset his eye disease. The contentious coffin was erected in front of him, like a kind of wooden throne with worked edges of copper, resting on a support shaped like claws. Around it, there were hundreds of red and blue flowers wrapped in newspaper. He had a déjà vu feeling, and for an instant, he listened to his mother's voice. No, you are not going to throw dirt on my husband. He felt a sour smell like rancid butter coming from the grooves of the coffin, and he couldn't help but thinking of himself opening it up and finding Mr. Ignacio's body with his swollen and black face and his wide eyes staring at him. And then, "Don't be ridiculous, Four Eyes!" Tony's words appeared like an echo coming from the wooden box. If the body were there, they wouldn't keep the coffin closed. The logic that those words once had no longer existed, but he was there, not for the body, not for people's money, but for the baseball and the damned blindness that condemned him. "Let's end this," he said to himself. He took a Swiss Army knife from his backpack and removed all the screws that sealed the box. Bastián turned on Tony's camera, held the edge of the coffin, and pushed upward the lid. He had to cover his mouth to keep from screaming. There he was. Mr. Ignacio's body was lying there among the quilted sides of the box, and despite of his poor eyesight, he noticed that his face was not black but yellow and full of large wounds. His eyes were closed and swollen. His livid and terrific hand formed a cross over his chest. Horrified, he turned around to run away. But he remembered the camera. If he forgot to take the picture, he not only could erase his opportunity to join the team from his mind, he also would be branded the outcast liar and coward of the town. So that he pointed the camera at the coffin. I'm sorry, he added, and the flash lit up the room. What are you doing here? Someone yelled from the door. Bastián felt his blood run cold. He looked backward, and before he could step, the owner of that voice seized him violently by the neck, forcing him to tiptoe to reach the floor. It was the same man who had crashed his glasses before. Stupid brat, the man added, shifting him strongly like trying to shake it out the dust from him. Did you burn up the van? No, the boy answered. I swear I don't. Liar, the man shouted, and noticed how Bastián was struggling to focus. So you are the owner of those glasses, aren't you? The boy didn't answer. The man grabbed him by the hair and dragged him across the room to the door. "You'll regret it," the man said in a threat tone. "You burned the wrong A whooshing noise came from the coffin, and the man had to stop. The stench of death invaded all the room like a vicious cloud of smoke that penetrated Bastian's nostrils and ran like a rat stampede through his throat. Both covered their faces, but the rottenness forced them to bend over in a nauseous feeling. "Did you open the coffin, damn stupid kid?" The word kid sounded like blasphemy on the lips of that man. The man approached the coffin, dragging Bastián by his hair, and forced him to look at the bloated and dead figure, and it gave him goosebumps in his neck. The body of Mr. Ignacio kept expressionless, faded. The wounds on his face made him think of scratches from a big animal, and his nostrils let out a sort of green breath, giving the illusion of being breathing. Then the tall man stretches his arm to close the coffin, and Ignacio's eyes opened and looked at him. A frightening cry came from the tall man's throat while the corpse dragged him to the casket. The lid fell down, locking both of them inside. Bastián paled and, with a lump of his throat, he stepped back, banging his leg with one of the chairs. He fell to the floor. Looking up, the boy saw how the coffin opened violently and the body of the tall man was catapulted into the air, forming an arc over his head and plowing into the chairs. He felt in an aberrant position, with mouth and eyes wide open. Death. "Help! Help!" he cried out, and using the glow of the moon coming from the small window as a guide, he strode across the room, hurting his legs and arms with all the chairs, while he felt the death blow in his neck. Before he could realize, he knocked himself out against a wall, bouncing off the floor. Mr. Ignacio got up from the coffin. His face showed an expression between impassive and avid, like the corpse of a man who had died of starvation. Staggering like a drunk, he started walking towards the boy. He drew monstrous and inconceivable shapes with his long, pale fingers. His smile, despite being grim, exposed his teeth as shining as recently carved in marble. Bastián hardly noticed the body was less than 2 meters from him. With a clumsy effort, he got to the window. "Tony!" he cried out. And just when he was on the verge to let go of the window, he felt how the boy outside grabbed him, pulling him until he got his head out. Hastily, he added, "Quick, here comes the—" "Dead man," he was trying to say when Tony stabbed him in his throat. The words became a grunt. Bastián, who seemed a storm blood cloud, splashed Tony's face in deep red. "Don't yell my name," Tony added with a trembling smile while letting go of the boy's hand. The teenager fell into the room with his hand pressing on the wound. The blood ran down his fingers. He felt an intolerable pain. 2 outs, men on second and third base. A pair of frozen hands grabbed him by his head and dragged him under the chairs. The boy didn't resist. When the creature sank its fangs between the scalene, let out a grunt. Then, only darkness. The day showed the first violet shades in the sky. In the center of the town, the lights of the hardware store and pharmacy poured a faint glow over the road. Some were still awake, such as Rebecca Santellis, who lit up a cigarette. She couldn't think about anything else but his father's burned-out truck, or Harry Duran, who from his cell planned on digging up the mayor's coffin after getting out of jail. Voices echoed through his mind. The town needs to know the truth. All others were sleeping the sleep of the just. In the house of the mayor, the shadowy silhouette of Tony was still standing meditative over the grass. He was startled by the figure of about 6 feet that crawled like a snake out of the window and stood up in front of him, with his head slightly crooked and drenched in blood. He looked at the boy with authority. The young man fell upon his knees. His face grew pale to such an extent that his freckles reflected in the window like small splashes on the glass. Mister, my grandma sent the kid as an offering to win your favor, he stuttered. Favor us with richness, and we will be always at your service, Emperor. A gentle wind arose and brought with it the whispers of the leaves and branches and the breath of carrion. Mr. Ignacio headed toward the center of the town, and Tony followed him. In the room, the coffin remained sealed with the lifeless body of Bastián inside. His nostrils let out a sort of green breath. He appeared to be breathing.